Greetings from the Washington, D.C. office of NMPA. I'm David Israelite, the President and CEO of NMPA, and I want to welcome you to the 2020 annual meeting. While we normally would do this together in person in New York, I'm glad that we could still get together virtually to give you an update on the state of the industry and also celebrate one of the world's greatest songwriters, Garth Brooks, who's going to join us later. To kick things off, though, I've invited my counterpart of the recording industry and my friend, Mitch Glazier, the Chairman and CEO of the RIAA. Mitch, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you and the RIAA are doing to help protect your record labels and their artist partners during this COVID crisis.
Yeah, we've, just like everybody else, we've had to accommodate the circumstances. We've had to move an entire content protection team off-site, create a global network along with our world partners remotely so that we can continue to protect artists' work 24/7, 365 days a year. So we're, switching remotely between Washington and Miami to London to New Zealand and back to Washington, because releases are still coming out every week, thank goodness, and we want to make sure that those releases are still protected every week that they come out. We've also done a lot of research on how COVID has impacted parts of the business, and we've become healthcare lobbyists. Along with your team, we've been working to try to make sure that creators can access relief that the government can offer during the crisis. So it's been a challenging but a really fascinating time.
The Copyright Office just recently released their Section 512 study after several years of work. I know this is an issue you care a lot about. It's one that you worked on when you were on the Hill before, and obviously one important to the music industry. For our viewers that maybe aren't as familiar with the 512 issue and the DMCA safe harbor, maybe you could just explain a little bit about why this is an important study and where we go from here.
Yeah, 512 sounds so sterile, but it is an incredibly important deal that was struck where all of the services that have user uploaded content can be held immune for the conduct of the people that upload the content using their service. But in exchange, they're supposed to make sure that they effectively protect against theft on their systems. That was the deal. And the problem, and I was on the Hill in 1998 when this was being crafted and helped. The problem is it was written for the services that existed at that time. So, if you look at who was around the negotiating table, companies like Bell South and MCI and Prodigy and Netscape and AOL, kids who, are my son's age have never heard of these companies before. They really were looking at a dial-up world. There was no such thing as peer-to-peer. There were no monster search engines. There were no services like YouTube or TikTok. And so over time, Congress has sought to rebalance the law so that the technology that passed it can be, accommodated by the law so that that balance can come back. It still isn't there. The services that should be responsible parts of the ecosystem who can voluntarily come in and protect music have refused so far to do so in a way that really protects creators, that protects songwriters and artists. And so the Copyright Office studied this for 5 years, doing roundtables everywhere you can imagine in the country with every single stakeholder. And finally was able to come out with a definitive report that pointed out the flaws in the system and the need to rebalance it. And so we're hopeful that that will help push a successful, responsible and accountable ecosystem going forward.
So this COVID crisis is obviously affecting the entire music industry, but one area that's particularly hit hard is the touring industry and artists who make a living by performing live shows. When do you think we'll see live shows again, and how do you think that part of the music industry will rebound from this crisis?
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of work on this with our live entertainment partners and with a lot of artist groups. And we've been focusing sort of as an example and a model in places like LA County, where a lot of artists live and operate. to try to develop protocols that will allow venues to open, and to do research to just, figure out when fans are willing to go back, because that part of the industry has suffered so much. So from what we've seen so far for the medium-sized venues where artists may get a lot of their income, 3 to 6 months until protocols can be put in place and fans feel comfortable going back and feeling comfortable with those safety protocols. But for the larger venues, so far, what the health officials are saying is it's probably 2021 before those giant venues are able to open up again and people will feel comfortable going back. So we're hopeful that as some start to open and open successfully, protocols can be put into place where people feel more comfortable and they're effective. And then we can open those other venues earlier so that artists who want to get back to work in the live industry can.
Yeah. You mentioned that we've become healthcare lobbyists and appropriations lobbyists, and you really deserve a lot of credit for pulling together the entire music industry to speak with one voice during the crafting of the CARES Act. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that experience and also what you see as the next step in terms of the government's reaction to this and how the music industry can be best served with our efforts to make sure we get out of this legislation what we need.
Yeah, it was really, it's amazing how the music community pulls together in times of crisis, and this isn't the first one. If you look at artists and songwriters, they're on the front lines making sure that they help people raise money no matter what the need is. Sometimes they're not so good at raising money when they're the ones in need, and that's our job to try to join with their groups and help them. And within 24 hours, 45 groups signed on to a letter to Congress to try to make sure that songwriters and artists and other creators could be taken care of. And I think within a week we had 65 music organizations pulling together from all parts of the industry to appeal to Congress. And the great thing about the CARES Act was it finally allowed sole proprietors and independent contractors, people without normal employment situations, or at least as employees of employers, that they would be able to get some relief. We've had a difficult time so far in consistent implementation, trying to actually get access to the relief that Congress has appropriated. That's what we're working on full time with your folks and everybody else right now.
Another area where you really have provided leadership is with regard to the California state law known as AB 5. That would have treated artists, producers, and songwriters as employees of music publishers and record labels. Are you pleased with the outcome of the amendments that we were able to get in that law? And maybe talk a little bit about what we see in terms of other states or even the federal government taking a similar path of legislation that's really aimed at companies like an Uber, right, but that has the unintended consequence of maybe affecting the music industry.
Right. I mean, these were aimed at so-called gig economy workers, which is sort of funny because musicians and artists are the original gig workers, right? That's where the term came from. They don't have employment situations that fit neatly into a box. And AB 5 in California is another example of what can happen when the music community comes together. And hats off to the unions, background vocalists, session musicians, and others who are rightly concerned about making sure that they're treated fairly as employees, but who also understood that the music industry is different. It isn't, an office job. And the employment situation, depending on who you are, whether you're a producer working with an artist, a songwriter working for an artist, or an artist with a label, that often is not a traditional employment relationship, and it shouldn't be. And so we were really pleased with the result, and the legislators in Sacramento have been terrific. They're committed to moving this even in the middle of a COVID crisis because music is so important to California. And we do hope that it's a model for New York and eventually for the federal government when they look at this employment issue.
Well, Mitch, we've been friends for more than 20 years before either of us had these jobs, and I just want people to know what a pleasure it's been to work with you in this role as the head of the RIAA, and that songwriters and music publishers really have a true friend in you and your team at the RIAA. And so thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you.